My dad forgot to hang up the phone. That's where everything changed. That's the moment I stopped being the person everyone took for granted and started becoming someone completely different. It was Thursday morning, April 9th, 6:47 a.m. I remember the time exactly because I was checking my email on my phone when his name appeared on the screen. Dad calling. Nothing unusual. He called most mornings. We'd talk about the market, about my listing, about how life was treating me. Casual. Comfortable. The kind of relationship where you don't suspect anything is happening behind the scenes. I didn't answer at first. I was in the shower, water running down my back, hair still dripping. My phone was on the bathroom counter, probably face up, the way I always leave it. I finished washing, dried off, wrapped myself in the towel, and checked the call log. Dad, no voicemail yet. I called him back as I was getting dressed. Already the routine, already normal. But that's when I heard it. His voice. Not the warm, careful tone he used when talking to me. A different tone. A voice I'd never heard from him before, and I'd known him for 34 years. "She's stupid enough to let us stay, Mike," he was saying to someone. I found out later it was Mike Castellano, my mom's brother, my uncle. I stood there, one arm in a sleeve of my shirt, frozen. She won't suspect anything, not for months. I should have hung up immediately. Maybe I should have, but I needed to hear. I needed to know what he was talking about, because I was the only woman in his life. That she was me. "The paperwork's already being drawn up," my uncle's voice came through, loud and bitter. "We just need her signature on the house deed. Once it's transferred, we're covered. The money from the sale, all of it goes in our names. She'll be lucky if we leave her with the down payment for an apartment." My hand stopped moving. "Even if she figures it out," my father said, and the casual tone of it made my stomach drop. "What's she going to do? She won't destroy the family over money. She never has." Then I heard the click of him ending the call, but I was still holding the phone, still standing there with one arm in my shirt. The phone call had connected, yes, but it had also connected to an incoming call on my end. The whole thing had recorded in my recent calls, complete with a 2-minute and 47-second duration indicator, the audio saved in my phone's call log. I didn't know that last part yet. My name is Sarah Chen, and 4 months before that phone call, I was someone I don't really recognize anymore when I look back at photos from that time. I was happy, or what I thought was happy. I was successful. I worked as a commercial real estate developer, the kind of job where you know the difference between a B-plus location and in a location because you've spent years learning to read the bones of a building, the flow of foot traffic, the way light moves through a space at different times of day. I wasn't rich, not by luxury standards, but I was comfortable, stable. The kind of person who could afford the mortgage on a beautiful house in an emerging neighborhood, who could put money away for retirement, who could help her parents when they needed it. My parents had never been wealthy. My father, David Chen, was a civil engineer who retired at 62. My mother, Patricia, had been an elementary school teacher until her arthritis made it too painful to stand all day in a classroom. They lived in a modest 3-bedroom home in Piedmont, the kind of place that had been passed down through my father's family. They didn't have much in savings. Social Security and a small pension kept them going, but it wasn't luxurious. I didn't resent helping them. They'd put me through college. They'd believed in me when I was studying for my real estate license, when I was learning commercial property development, when I was taking risks that my parents couldn't understand but supported anyway. The house they lived in was worth maybe $350,000 at that point. It had appreciated slowly over the years, but it was in a neighborhood that was starting to change. Developers were looking at the area. Younger people were moving in. Gentrification was coming, the kind that changes a neighborhood completely over 5 to 10 years. My uncle, Mike Castellano, my mother's brother, had never done well for himself. He'd bounced between jobs, construction work, some time in retail management, a period where he tried to start a restaurant that failed spectacularly. He had money troubles, real ones, the kind where you start getting letters from credit companies, where people don't return your calls because they know what you're going to ask for. He was bitter about it. I could see that. The way he'd look at my house when I'd invite my parents over for holiday dinners. The way his eyes would move over the spaces, calculating. My mother would notice too, sometimes. I'd catch her watching him, a worried expression on her face. But she never said anything directly. My father had always been logical, pragmatic. He didn't show much emotion. Growing up, I never saw him angry, never saw him celebrate wildly. He was the kind of person who solved problems quietly, methodically, without much fanfare. I thought that was strength. I thought it was maturity. I didn't realize it could also mean he didn't let you see what he was really thinking. In early January, my father had started asking me more questions about my work. He wanted to know about property valuations, about how real estate prices were changing in different neighborhoods, about my opinions on the housing market. At the time, I thought he was just interested. He always asked smart questions. We'd have these conversations at my house, or sometimes they'd meet me for lunch near my office. "Your mother's neighborhood," he said to me one Tuesday in late January, over salads at a restaurant near downtown. "You've driven through there recently." I had. I'd been doing a consultation on a strip mall 2 blocks away from their house. "It's changing," I said. "Property values are going up. I'd estimate their house has appreciated maybe $50,000 in the last year and a half, maybe more if they did renovations. The lot size is what buyers really want in that area now." He nodded, asked a few follow-up questions. What would make the neighborhood more valuable? What kind of renovations? How much would developers pay for the lot if they wanted to build something new? I answered all of it. It was my job to know these things. I didn't realize he was gathering intelligence. The morning after the phone call, I didn't call my father. I went to work. I showed up at my office on the 18th floor of the Sterling building, and I sat down at my desk, and I tried very hard to concentrate on the Riverside development deal I was working on. A retail complex near the water. Good bones. Steady foot traffic. The kind of project that should have excited me. Instead, I kept thinking about the words. "She's stupid enough to let us stay." Who was us? My father and my uncle. Of course. But how long had they been planning this? Had they discussed it over the phone before, or was this the first time they'd said it out loud? And the paperwork? What paperwork? What exactly were they planning to do with my parents' house? I pulled up Zillow on my computer. It was a nervous habit, but I needed to see something concrete. Their house. 2847 Ashmont Drive, listed as a private property, not on the market. Last estimate, $398,000. But in my field, I knew these estimates were conservative. In that neighborhood, right now, with the way development was happening, that property could easily fetch $450,000, maybe $500,000 to a builder. That's when I understood. They weren't planning to refinance against it. They weren't planning to borrow money or take out a home equity line of credit. They were planning to sell it. And they were planning to do it without my mother knowing. My hands were shaking as I closed the browser. I put my phone on silent and stared at my monitor without reading anything on it for 20 minutes. Around 2 p.m., my mother called. I almost didn't answer. "Hi, Mom," I said, keeping my voice level. "Sarah, honey," her voice was bright, artificially so. "Your father mentioned you might want to come over this weekend. We could make your favorite, that salmon pasta dish. Remember." My mother was the kind of person who showed everything on her face. She was incapable of deception. If something was wrong, you could see it in the way her eyes didn't quite focus, the way her sentences would start and then stop. "Is everything okay?" I asked. "Oh, yes, of course. Why wouldn't it be? We just want to see you. It's been a few weeks." It had been 9 days. I'd been there for dinner last Saturday. "Mom, is Dad acting strange to you?" There was a pause. "What do you mean, strange?" "I don't know. Secretive, distracted." Another pause. Longer this time. "He's been on his computer a lot," she said quietly. "Late at night. I asked him what he was doing, and he said it was just work stuff. But your father, he retired 5 years ago, so I don't understand what work he'd be doing at 11 p.m. My throat tightened. "Mom, I think you should talk to him. About your house. About your finances. Just directly ask him what's happening." "Sarah, what are you talking about? You're scaring me." I couldn't tell her over the phone. I couldn't be the person to break this open without understanding the full picture first. So I made an excuse about a work call coming in, promised I'd come over on Saturday, and hung up. That night, I did something I'd never done before. I called my father. "Hey, Dad," I said when he answered. His voice was normal, casual, completely unchanged from every other phone conversation we'd ever had. "Sarah, how are you?" "Good. Listen, I wanted to talk to you about something. I've been thinking about your house, about Mom's future. If anything ever happened to you, or if the market changes, I want to make sure you both have a solid plan." I was fishing, deliberately creating an opening for him to tell me the truth. "We're fine, Sarah. We're managing." "I know you are, but you know my business. The market is moving fast right now. What if there's an opportunity? What would you even do?" He was quiet for a moment. "Your mother and I have discussed the house. We feel secure where we are. It's our home. We're not interested in selling." The word we hung in the air. We, your mother and I, but he was lying. His calm, even tone was the voice of someone telling a carefully constructed lie. I felt something shift in my chest, a door closing, a decision being made. "Okay," I said. "I trust you. Let me know if that changes." "Of course." That was it. That was the confirmation I needed. For the next week, I pretended everything was normal. I went to work. I attended meetings. I called my parents on Wednesday evening, the way I normally did. I made plans to come over on Saturday. To anyone watching, I was the same Sarah I'd always been. But inside, I was systematically taking my life apart and rebuilding it. First, I opened a new email address. Not through my regular Gmail account, through a temporary privacy service that didn't require recovery information linked to my personal data. I used the name Sarah Matthews, which was my mother's maiden name. I created a folder system, organized and meticulous. Second, I called my lawyer, David Huang, a family law attorney I'd worked with before on a contract issue. I told him I needed a confidential consultation about an inheritance matter. He scheduled me for that same Saturday, before I went to my parents' house. Third, I started reading about my state's laws regarding real estate fraud, elder financial abuse, and undisclosed transfers of property. I needed to know exactly what they were trying to do, legally speaking, and what protections existed. What I found was worse than I'd thought. Elder financial abuse. That's what this would be if my father was planning to transfer the property without my mother's knowledge or consent, especially if it was a community property state, and it was. My mother had equal claim to that house. They'd purchased it together during their marriage with shared assets. My father couldn't legally transfer ownership without her signature, but they could forge her signature. They could have a document notarized with a false signature. It happened more often than people realized. By Friday, I'd learned something else. I'd been going through public records, the way I did for my job anyway, and I'd found something that made my skin crawl. My Uncle Mike had consulted with a real estate attorney named Stephen Walsh 3 months ago. The firm's records were semi-public in terms of meeting logs. I couldn't see the details, but I could see that he'd met with them twice, in November and early December. And I could see, because Walsh's firm specializes in property transfers, that they'd been discussing something that involved my parents' address. That meant this wasn't spontaneous. This wasn't a recent idea. This had been planned. For months. While my father smiled at me across dinner tables and asked questions about property values, he'd been planning to take the house that wasn't his to give away. The Saturday lunch with my lawyer was the turning point. David Huang listened to me carefully. He had the kind of face that didn't react much, good for a lawyer. When I finished, he set down his pen and looked at me directly. "Do you have proof of this plan?" he asked. "I overheard a phone conversation," I said. "My father called my mother's brother and said they were drawing up paperwork. He said I was stupid enough to let them stay." "Did you record it?" "No, but I have it on my call log, the call duration." "That's not going to be enough," David said carefully. A phone call proves they spoke. It doesn't prove what they discussed. You'd need to show the actual documentation of the plan or get some kind of confession. So I can't stop them. Not yet, but you can prepare. If they go through with this, if they actually try to transfer the property, then you have grounds for a lawsuit. The question is whether you want to prevent it from happening in the first place or deal with it after. I sat back in my chair. The restaurant around us suddenly felt very loud. How would I prevent it? You'd need proof, written proof, communications where they explicitly state their intention, and you'd need to alert your mother before they can execute the plan. He paused. But I need to tell you something, Sarah. If you do that, if you expose them, your family is finished. There's no coming back from that kind of betrayal. I already knew that. I think some part of me had known it since that morning in the shower, water running down my face, listening to my father's voice say those words. I understand, I said. The question isn't whether you can prove it legally. The question is whether you're willing to burn everything down. I looked out the window of the restaurant. Downtown spread out beneath us, all glass and steel in movement. Thousands of people making thousands of decisions every day. How many of them, right now, were discovering that someone they loved had betrayed them? How many were standing at exactly this point, where the only path forward meant destroying the relationship they'd spent their whole life building? Yes, I said quietly, I'm willing. That Saturday dinner at my parents' house was the strangest evening of my life. I walked in at 6:15 p.m. My mother had made the salmon pasta just like she'd promised. The table was set beautifully with the good plates, the ones she only used when she was trying to make something feel special. My father was in the kitchen, opening a bottle of wine. He turned when he heard me come in and smiled. That smile, that completely normal, untouched smile. For a moment, I almost couldn't do it. Almost couldn't sit across from him and make small talk when everything in me wanted to stand up and scream. But I didn't scream. That's the thing nobody tells you about rage. Real rage, the kind that burns hot enough to actually change your life, doesn't come out loud. It comes out quiet. It comes out cold. I sat down. I ate the pasta. I complimented my mother's cooking. I asked my father about his golf game. I smiled at appropriate moments. And all the while, I was observing them both like I was studying specimens in a lab. My father kept glancing at his phone. 3 times during dinner, he checked it, his fingers moving across the screen quickly before setting it back down. My mother didn't notice. She was too busy being happy that I was there, that we were all together, that things felt normal. I wondered if she suspected anything at all. If there was some part of her that sensed the wrongness beneath the surface, the way animals sense storms before they hit. I've been thinking, my father said, around the time we were finishing the main course, about maybe doing some renovations on the house. Fresh paint, maybe new flooring in the kitchen. I set down my fork carefully. Really, I said, that's a big project. Your mother and I have been talking about it. It would be nice to update things, make it more modern. My mother was smiling, pleased, like this was a genuine discussion she'd been part of, which meant she had no idea. He was testing it out on me first, seeing how I'd react. Have you gotten estimates? I asked. Just starting to. We'll probably talk to a contractor next month. Next month? That would be around the time they were planning to push the paperwork through. Around the time they were hopping, I wouldn't notice, wouldn't suspect, would be too busy with work to pay attention. That sounds nice, I said, and I meant it in a way. I meant it the way you mean things when you're standing above the situation, watching it play out, already knowing how it ends. When I left that night, my father walked me to the door. He hugged me and I hugged him back. He smelled the same as always, his cologne, soap, the faint smell of the wine he'd been drinking. I'm glad you came, he said. You don't visit as often anymore. I know, I said. I've been busy with work, but I'll try to come more often. He seemed satisfied with that. He didn't know that I was beginning the process of gathering evidence, that every conversation from this point forward would be potential material, that I was watching him the way a chess player watches an opponent, understanding his next moves before he made them. That's when I stopped being hurt. That's when I became someone else. The first thing I did was make sure my phone was set to record calls. It's legal to record conversations if you're part of them, in most states. California is a two-party consent state, which means both people need to agree to the recording. But there's a technicality. If you have a beeping sound, if you alert the other person that they're being recorded, you're covered. Most phones do this automatically when you enable call recording. I enabled it. The second thing I did was set up a simple security camera in the guest bedroom of my house. Not hidden, that would be illegal, but discreetly placed on a shelf pointed at my desk. I needed to know if anyone went through my personal documents. I needed to know if my father or uncle ever came to my house when I wasn't home, which they would eventually, if they were really planning what I thought they were. The third thing I did was hire a private investigator. His name was Tom Reeves, and he came recommended by David Huang. Tom was in his 60s, former police detective, with the kind of weathered face that told you he'd seen everything. I met him at a coffee shop in Oakland, away from my usual neighborhood, in a place where nobody would know me. I need you to find financial records, I told him. My uncle is planning to sell my parents' house. I need to find evidence, bank statements, communications with real estate agents, anything that shows he and my father are planning this transfer without my mother knowing. Tom listened without taking notes. That's going to be difficult without probable cause, he said. I can't hack into bank accounts or email, but I can do surveillance, I can interview people, I can pull public records. Do whatever you can within the law. How much are you authorized to spend? I didn't hesitate. Whatever it takes. Over the next 2 weeks, I orchestrated a very careful plan. I invited my father to my office. I told him I wanted his advice on a property deal I was considering, something in his area of expertise. He came on a Tuesday morning, and while he was there, looking at mock-ups and discussing the investment potential, I positioned myself to record our entire conversation. I asked him careful, gentle questions about real estate value, about how you determine property worth, about what circumstances might prompt someone to sell a family home. He answered all of my questions, and as he talked, I was measuring his words, listening for any slip, any acknowledgement of the plan. He didn't give me anything. He was too careful, too controlled. He'd already compartmentalized this, separated the version of himself that was my father from the version of himself that was the person planning fraud against my mother. On the Wednesday of that same week, Tom called me. I have something, he said. Your uncle met with 2 real estate agents in the past 6 weeks. Both of them handle sales in the greater Piedmont area. I couldn't get access to their agency records, but one of them, woman named Lena Vasquez at Coastal Properties, mentioned to a client, who happens to be my cousin, that she had an interesting listing coming up, a property off Ashmont Drive, likely to go for somewhere in the $450,000 to $500,000 range. My stomach twisted. They already have a real estate agent. Not officially listed, but they're prepping for it, and there's more. Tom pulled up his phone and showed me a photo. It was from a surveillance camera at a Starbucks near the courthouse. It showed my father, my uncle, and a man I didn't recognize, all sitting together at an outdoor table. The date stamp was 4 days ago. I've been tracking their movements, Tom said. Your father and uncle met at that Starbucks with a man named Marcus Webb. I ran him. He's a notary public, not licensed for legal documents, but he's done a lot of flexible work for people over the years. Nothing criminal that stuck, but there are complaints. People saying documents were notarized without proper verification. I stared at the photo. They're going to forge my mother's signature. That would be my assessment, yes. That evening, I went home and sat in my living room in the dark. I didn't turn on the lights. I just sat there, in the space that I'd built, that I'd worked for, and I let myself feel the weight of what was happening. Then I called David Huang. I have what I need, I told him. I have surveillance photos of them meeting with a notary. I have recorded phone conversations where they explicitly discuss selling the house and transferring the proceeds to themselves. I have a real estate agent preparing for a sale." "Do you have anything in writing?" David asked. "An actual document, an email, anything concrete?" "Not yet, but I know they're moving fast. Within the next 2 weeks, I think." "Then we need to move faster. I'm going to file a cease and desist letter. If they try to execute this transfer after receiving that letter, they're knowingly committing fraud. It creates a paper trail that a judge will see very clearly. And if my mother refuses to press charges, if she doesn't want to prosecute her own husband, then you do it. You're a family member with a direct financial interest in the property. You have standing to file a civil lawsuit. And more importantly, if they commit the fraud, you have grounds to report them to the police." This was the moment where I could have stopped. This was the moment where I could have warned my mother, helped her protect herself, maybe even confronted my father directly and given him a chance to back away. But I didn't do any of those things. The cease and desist letter arrived at my parents' house on a Tuesday. I knew when it was coming because David had scheduled it. He sent it via courier, certified mail, the kind of official legal document that arrives with ceremony and cannot be ignored. My mother called me the same afternoon, her voice shaking. "Sarah, what is this? Why is there a letter from a lawyer saying your father and uncle can't transfer our property?" "Mom," I said quietly, "I need you to sit down." I told her everything, the phone call, the surveillance, the notary, the real estate agent, Tom's investigation, all of it. I laid it out methodically, like presenting a case, because that's what it was. She didn't cry at first. She just listened, and with each piece of information, I could hear the way her voice changed, the way her breath became shallow. "Your father would never," she said at one point. "He wouldn't do this." "I wish I was wrong," I said, "but the evidence is clear." There was a long silence. "What do you want me to do?" she asked finally. "I want you to be safe. I want you to talk to a lawyer. I want you to protect yourself." She called my father that evening. I don't know what was said. I don't know if she confronted him directly or if she just asked about the letter. But I knew that the moment had arrived. The moment when they understood that I knew. My father called me around 8 p.m. "Sarah, what did you do?" His voice was different now. All the careful control was gone. Underneath was something raw and desperate. "I protected my mother," I said calmly. "You had no right." "I had every right. You were planning to commit fraud against her, against your own wife." "You don't understand the situation," he said, and his voice cracked slightly. "We needed the money. Your uncle needed help, and I couldn't just—" "You were going to steal from her," I cut him off. "You were going to forge her signature and take her house." There was a sound, like he was breathing heavily. "If you pursue this," he said slowly, "if you actually go through with whatever you're planning, you'll destroy this family." "It's already destroyed," I said. "You destroyed it the moment you decided to do this." He hung up. I didn't cry. I didn't feel relieved. I felt hollow, focused, like I was watching myself from above, watching this moment happen, understanding that something fundamental had shifted and would never shift back. 3 days later, my mother hired a family law attorney, a woman named Patricia Morrison, tough, experienced, the kind of lawyer who'd handled dozens of cases exactly like this. We met in her office, the three of us, my mother, Patricia, and me. My mother had been quiet since the phone call, not angry yet, just processing, trying to reconcile the man she'd been married to for 37 years with the person who'd been planning to betray her. "Here's what we know," Patricia said, laying out documents on the table. "The property in question is community property, purchased during the marriage with shared funds. Your mother has equal claim to it, regardless of whose name is on the title. Any transfer without her explicit, witnessed consent is illegal." She showed us the cease and desist letter she'd already prepared, adding additional language that explicitly prohibited any and all transfers, modifications, or refinancing of the property at 2847 Ashmont Drive. "I'll be sending this to Mr. Chen and to your uncle as well. If they attempt to proceed after receiving this, they're committing fraud with full knowledge of the legal implications. That significantly increases the damages if your mother chooses to pursue this. My mother was pale. Will it come to court? She asked. It depends on whether they're willing to listen to reason, Patricia said. If your husband cooperates, if he acknowledges the attempt and terminates all communication with the notary and the real estate agent, we might be able to resolve this without a full lawsuit. And if he doesn't, then we file. We go to court. We request injunctive relief to prevent the transfer, and we request damages for the cost of defending against this action, plus attorney's fees. My mother looked at me. I don't want to destroy him, she said quietly. He's destroying himself, I said. We're just documenting it. 2 weeks passed. My father didn't respond to Patricia's letter. My uncle did, through his own attorney, who immediately advised him to cease all contact with my father regarding the property, to terminate his relationship with the notary, and to provide written confirmation that he was withdrawing from any plans to sell or transfer the property. My uncle, apparently, was smart enough to recognize the legal trap when it was clearly visible. My father was not. Instead, he retained his own attorney, a man named George Winters who specialized in family law, but had a reputation for being willing to play fast and loose with the rules. Winters sent a response claiming that my father had every right to encourage his wife to sell the property if she chose to, that there was no evidence of actual fraud because no transfer had yet occurred, and that my mother's restraining order was an overreach designed to punish my father for a discussion that never resulted in any actionable harm. It was a clever defense because it was partially true. They hadn't actually transferred the property. They hadn't forged any documents that had actually been filed. The cease and desist letter had caught them before the actual crime occurred. But there was evidence, and Patricia was better than George Winters. She filed for a temporary restraining order, bringing forward the surveillance photographs, the recordings of the phone calls, the documentation from the private investigator. She presented it all to a judge named Elizabeth Rodriguez, who reviewed the evidence in her chambers. It took 3 hours. When the order came through, it was explicit. My father was prohibited from discussing the sale or transfer of the property with any real estate agent or broker, meeting with the notary public Marcus Webb, having any further communications with his brother-in-law Mike Castellano regarding the property, making any modifications to the title or deed, applying for any refinancing or home equity line of credit against the property. And if he violated any of these conditions, he faced immediate arrest and a criminal fraud charge. The temporary restraining order became a permanent one 2 weeks later, after a hearing where my father's attorney tried, and failed, to convince the judge that the evidence was circumstantial, that my father was the victim of a vindictive daughter, that his intentions were misunderstood. My mother sat in the courtroom that day, next to Patricia Morrison, and she didn't look at my father once. Not when he was testifying, not when his attorney was speaking, not even when the judge issued the order that would legally prevent him from ever attempting this again. She just stared straight ahead, and I could see something dying in her eyes. The restraining order was finalized on a Thursday in late May. By the following Monday, my father had filed for divorce. I found out when my mother called me, her voice steady but hollow, and told me that she'd received the papers. 37 years of marriage, and he was ending it through legal documents served by a process server at her house. Patricia Morrison told us that it was a strategic move. If he divorced my mother, the house would no longer be considered community property in the same way. It could be divided in a settlement. He could potentially argue for a portion of the equity, claim that he'd contributed to its maintenance and upkeep, fight for money in the dissolution. He's trying to salvage something, Patricia said. The fraud didn't work, so now he's pivoting to a different approach. My mother was quiet. I want to fight him, she said finally. I want to take everything. I want him to know what it feels like to lose something he thought was permanent. This is the moment where the story could have ended. This is the moment where I could have said that justice was served, that my mother was protected, that my father had been stopped before he could commit the fraud. But then Tom Reeves called me again. "I found something else," he said. "Something bigger. Your father and your Uncle Mike weren't working alone on this. The notary, Marcus Webb, he's part of a larger operation. I've been tracking his communications, and he's brokered at least 15 similar transactions in the past 2 years. Elderly parents, properties in the $300,000 to $600,000 range. Adult children who suddenly discover their property is being transferred without their knowledge." I felt something shift in my chest. "This is organized," I said. "This is a fraud ring," Tom confirmed. "And your father, your uncle, they're not the architects. They're just the participants. The real person running it is a real estate investor named Jonathan Pierce. He's the one connecting the notary with the families. He's the one taking a cut of each sale." Jonathan Pierce. I knew that name. Not personally, but I knew it because he'd been in my professional circles. He was someone I'd competed against for properties, someone whose business model I'd always found suspect but could never prove. He was in his early 50s, well-connected, always smiling in the right rooms, with money that seemed to come from nowhere specific. He was a predator, and my father had been willing to become one too, in order to help his brother-in-law. "I need everything you have on Jonathan Pierce," I said to Tom. "I thought you might," he said. "I've been building a file." Part 10. The Exposure, 3940 MINUTS. 2 weeks later, I walked into the Santa Clara County Police Department with Tom Reeves and a folder containing everything. The financial records, the surveillance photographs, the notary's communications, the phone calls, the restraining order, the divorce filings. Every piece of evidence, organized chronologically, showing not just my father's involvement but the larger network that Jonathan Pierce had built. The detective I spoke with was named Susan Cray. She listened to everything I had to say without interrupting, taking notes, occasionally asking for clarification. When I finished, she sat back in her chair. "This is solid work," she said. "The surveillance, the recordings, we can build a case on this. Your father's definitely looking at fraud charges. Your uncle too, unless he cooperates." "What about Jonathan Pierce?" "That's a bigger investigation. But if we can flip some of the other participants, get them to talk about his role in coordinating these frauds, we can potentially bring RICO charges. Organized fraud. That's a federal crime." "I want him prosecuted," I said flatly. "All of them." "I'll start with your father," Detective Cray said. "Once we have his statement, we'll move up the chain." I didn't attend my father's arrest. I didn't need to. I heard about it from my mother, who called me afterward, her voice strange, neither satisfied nor sad, just finished. "He's been booked," she said. "He has a bail hearing tomorrow." My father's attorney tried to argue that he was a flight risk if released on bail. Instead, the judge released him on his own recognizance, with a condition that he attend all court dates and submit to GPS monitoring. He was going to be tried for conspiracy to commit fraud against a spouse, for attempted forgery of official documents, for elder financial abuse. My uncle, after a conversation with his attorney, agreed to cooperate with the investigation in exchange for reduced charges. He testified that Jonathan Pierce had approached them both nearly a year earlier, had explained the process, had assured them that it would work, that families rarely pursued criminal charges in these situations, that they just lose the property and move on. Within 3 months, Detective Cray had built a case strong enough to bring federal charges against Jonathan Pierce and his organization. The operation had victimized 17 families, stolen property valued at just over $8.4 million. My parents' house was supposed to be the 18th. My father took a plea deal, 8 years in federal prison with the possibility of parole after 5. My mother obtained the house entirely in the divorce settlement, along with a portion of my father's retirement to cover attorney's fees. She could have sold it. She could have taken the $450,000 or $500,000 and started over, lived modestly somewhere smaller and less expensive. Instead, she stayed. She renovated it properly, with contractors she hired herself, without my father's input or knowledge. She updated the kitchen, refinished the floors, painted the walls colors that made her happy. I helped her do it. We spent Saturday mornings together, making decisions about paint swatches and countertop materials, laughing sometimes at her terrible taste in design. She wanted neon green cabinets. I convinced her of a soft sage instead. My mother is 68 years old, and she's learning to live alone for the first time in her adult life. Some days are harder than others. Some days, I can see the loss on her face, the way she looks at his empty chair at the dinner table or the space on the shelf where his books used to be. But she's rebuilding. Slowly, carefully, with the same methodical intelligence that my father had possessed but had twisted toward something dark. As for me, I changed my number. Not because my father tried to contact me, he didn't, but because I needed to be done. I needed to sever that connection completely and move forward into whatever I was becoming. 3 months after his conviction, I sold my house. I didn't have to, but I found that I couldn't live there anymore, couldn't sleep in a place that held so many memories of the before time, when I'd believed that family meant something more than what I'd discovered it could mean. I sold it for $980,000. The market had moved. The neighborhood had changed. Everything had shifted. With the proceeds, I bought a smaller place, something new, something that didn't have any history attached to it. And I started building a new life, one with clearer boundaries, higher walls, and a much keener sense of who I could trust. People sometimes ask me if I regret it, if I do it differently, knowing what I know now. The answer is no. But not because I'm proud of destroying my family, or because I think revenge was the right choice. I regret it because my father made it the only choice available to me. He chose his greed, his desperation, his willingness to commit fraud over his relationship with me and with my mother. I didn't destroy the family. He did. I just documented it. And in the documentation, in the cold, methodical gathering of evidence, I found something unexpected. I found that I could survive betrayal, that I could look at someone who'd hurt me and not turn away, but instead look directly, gather what I needed, and move forward with my life intact. My mother sometimes calls me in the evening. We'll talk about her day, about her renovations, about the book club she's joined, the volunteer work she started doing with elderly women in her neighborhood who have experienced similar betrayals. She's building something too, something different from what she had before, but perhaps something more authentic, something based on who she actually is, not who she was pretending to be. Last week, she told me something that I've been thinking about ever since. I think, she said carefully, that sometimes people do terrible things, and we have to decide whether we're going to let those terrible things define us, or whether we're going to be stronger than what was done to us. I think you're already doing that, I told her. So are you, she said. And maybe that's what this whole thing was about, in the end. Not the revenge, not the exposure of the fraud ring, not even the satisfaction of watching my father face consequences for what he tried to do. Maybe it was about understanding that betrayal doesn't have to destroy you, that sometimes the people who love you will try to hurt you anyway, and that the only way to survive that is to look at it directly, understand it completely, and then choose who you're going to be on the other side of it. I chose to be someone strong. And every day since, I've kept choosing that,